So let me introduce our second speaker, who is Seung-hwan Baek. I spent a few years to pronounce his name, and even I found from his website, he has a pronunciation record in his website to teach everybody to know his real pronunciation. It's Seung-hwan Baek. So this topic is about the differentiable computational imaging with light. Seung-hwan Baek is the assistant professor from the Postech in Korea. Before he joined Postech, he worked as a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton University and holds a PhD degree in computer science from KAIST. His research interest lies in computer graphics and computer vision with a particular focus on computational imaging and display. His work aims to capture, model, and analyze high-dimensional visual information of the real world originating from the complex interplay between the light, material appearance, and the geometry. To this end, he designed end-to-end computer imaging and display system for fundamental scientific analysis, as well as diverse application domains. So welcome, Professor Seung-hwan Baek.
Thank you. Right. Thank you for nice introduction, Lin. And can you see my screen here?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Then let me start my presentation. And thank you for inviting me as a speaker for this great opportunity. And today I would like to talk about differentiable computational imaging with light waves. So these days, we are surrounded by many imaging systems. For instance, in AR, VR glasses, the vehicles, autonomous vehicles, robots, our mobile phone, and even medical devices. And this shows the importance of well-designed imaging system for diverse applications. And conventionally, digital imaging refers to the process of recording the reflected light photons from a scene using lens. And then we record it with our electronic sensor, which gives our raw sensor measurements. Then we process it into a visually pleasing image, and we share the captured image with our friends and people. Then with the advance of computer graphics, computer vision, machine learning, and so on. Now what we do these days is to put reconstruction algorithm, or in other words, as a form of computation to process this raw data or processed image data to recover some hidden information about the scene, such as the semantic classes, depth information, material, or surface normals. And what I'm interested in here in this pipeline is, instead of putting computation only as a post-processing unit here, we're about to put the computation for all different aspects to the illumination, scene, optics, sensor, raw data, or the other parts as well. Then the goal here is to improve the accuracy of the previous reconstruction algorithm, but also go beyond that to enable complete new applications. And this field is called as computational imaging. And as a computational imaging researcher, I want to tackle the problem of capturing, modeling, analyzing, and exploiting light waves for graphics, vision, imaging, and display applications. And these days, I'm focusing on reconstructing the shape, depth information, appearance, and also I'm interested in the holographic display. Overall, these are the 8 main directions that I'm pursuing these days. And because of the time limit today, I like to introduce only 4 of these. The first one is the differentiable camera. So in order to explain what the differentiable camera is, let me give you the example of the human vision system and how that evolves to the current vision. So our human vision system consists of 2 main parts. One is the sensing part, the other is the processing part. And sensing part, of course, consists of our human eyes. And on the left side, you can see how our human eyes, its optics and its neural system has evolved to the current one. And in the process of this evolution, our human brain also cooperatively has evolved to our current form to coordinate with this input visual information to live our current life, right? So here the point is that our imaging system and hardware imaging system and the software processing unit, they have cooperatively evolved together. Now let's look at our how these imaging devices have been developed in modern days. So what we do is we create this really nice hardware system that collects the light into this sensor. Then the sensor is super high resolution, so it gives this the nice chameleon image, for example. Then we have a neural network these days to process this image and extract some hidden scene information. Here in this example, such as the class of this image that gives the estimate of this chameleon, right? Then we have a loss function, which is used to train this neural network. And this is how this current camera has been developed. But what we do find difference of this development with our human visual system is that this one only trains our processing unit, which is the neural network here, right? So what differentiable camera aims to is that we train or we optimize both our imaging system and our reconstruction method software jointly in order to do something more interesting by only without having too much trouble of looking at this given single hardware fixed system. So for instance, let me give you an example in the context of depth imaging. So depth imaging is the problem that aims to estimate the distance between a camera to a seen object, right? And its applications are quite diverse in AR, VR, robotics, or in autonomous vehicle. And these are the applications that is required to understand the geometric structure of the surrounding, right? And in order to do this, we need to have this depth imaging capability. One of the depth imaging systems that is particularly attractive is active stereo system. So you may heard about the stereo that has two cameras nearby capturing a scene. Here in this example, we are capturing a single bunny with two cameras. Then in active stereo system, we employ a structured illumination module that emits a specific illumination image to a scene. You can think of it as just a projector. So we have this active stereo module in Kinect or in Intel sensor and so on and so on. Then what is going to happen is that when you capture this scene with your two stereo cameras, you are not only capturing this bunny, but also capturing the projected illumination pattern on top of this object. Then the idea of active stereo system is to utilize this projected illumination pattern as a matching cue to extract the depth information. Here, one thing to note that is that this what illumination pattern is made with this active stereo system is determined by an optical element called as diffractive optical element, DOE. This DOE is a simple optical element that is made of really small the slab of glasses with different thicknesses. This glass has the size of like the micrometer pixel pitch with the thickness of also micrometer or in the order of millimeter that generates some certain phase shift for the different light waves, and how to fabricate or how to determine this the micron scale thicknesses of this glass slab. We're gonna dictate this illumination pattern of the structured illumination module. Okay, just keeping that in mind, let's move to how this active stereo systems has been designed in a conventional manner. So here, this is the 2D graph that shows the design space of the active stereo system. On the vertical axis, we have the illumination image. Here, you can interpret this the vertical design space as the potential illumination image that you can generate with the DOE. In the horizontal axis, we have the reconstruction method. So a certain dot here in this reconstruction method could be a neural network or could be a different form of reconstruction method for depth estimation. And then this the 2D graph tells you the expected depth error. What that means is that if the value is low, then that combination of a illumination image and a reconstruction algorithm will gonna give you the better depth estimation or better depth imaging capability in terms of depth. Then what people have been doing so far is that they first hand engineer the specific illumination image, right? They find some patterns that could be probably easy to be fabricated or look random as possible, something like that. They first fix the illumination image in the hardware. Then a software scientist or engineer takes it over, and given that illumination pattern, they've tried to find the best reconstruction algorithm. It could be a new neural network architecture, or it could be a more simple and efficient form of reconstruction method. Then they're gonna give you some local optimal in this design space. What we proposed in this work, in the principle of differentiable camera, is that let's try to optimize this illumination image and reconstruction algorithm jointly together to find hopefully a global optimal, or at least better local minima than the previous fixed pipeline-based method. So here is the rough pipeline. We start with a DOE phase map that we want to optimize, right? And then we try to optimize this DOE phase map and the reconstruction algorithm together to estimate the better depth. So here, the main idea is that given the DOE map, given the DOE phase map, we can estimate or we can simulate what kinds of stereo images that we are going to capture in simulation, right? Then we have a reconstruction neural network that are going to estimate the depth information for given these stereo images. Then if we have the ground truth depth map in simulation, we can compute the loss function, which will gonna be backpropagated through this reconstruction network to the DOE phase map. If everything is implemented in a differentiable manner, then we can jointly optimize this DOE phase map and reconstruction. Here, important thing is that the DOE phase map we're gonna determine what kinds of illumination pattern that we are going to use, and reconstruction algorithm is the network that we're gonna process the stereo images captured under this specific illumination pattern to estimate the scene depth. Okay. We obtained the optimal illumination pattern and reconstruction algorithm in simulation and fabricated the obtained illumination, obtained the DOE profile as an imaging system shown on the right. And here are the actual the demo of our imaging system, including our fabricated learned DOE and our neural network. Here you can see that we can estimate the scene depth quite accurately for diverse the scene objects, low reflectance specs, specular stop sign, diffuse color checker, and even transparent bubble wrap. Okay, let's move to the next topic, which is the reflectance imaging. In the reflectance imaging, I like to particularly focus on the polarization, which is a wave property of light. And polarization is related to the orientation or oscillation pattern of the electric field. And as we all know, the light exists as waves, and it consists of the electric field and magnetic field oscillating with each other in a perpendicular manner. And the oscillation pattern in time of this oscillation pattern of this electric field in time is polarization. And specifically, if we draw a tangent plane with respect to the direction of this light propagation, and if we project this electric field's oscillation pattern to this plane, they're gonna give you some oscillation pattern in this 2D. And this 2D oscillation pattern is polarization, and it could be linear polarization, circular polarization, elliptical polarization, and so on and so on. And you may be not familiar with the polarization of light, mainly because we humans cannot sense the polarization of light, right? We cannot distinguish the light with a certain polarization from another polarization of light. So, however, in the nature, we have many living mechanisms that can distinguish the different polarization states of light. And here is an example, the popular mantis shrimp that can distinguish the light with different polarization states. And the reason that they have developed this capability of sensing polarization of light is because the sensing polarization could be helpful for their living, right? And people have identified also the benefits of using polarization for diverse applications. And we have made use of polarization for example, for our sunglasses, or distinguishing the reflection on the windows, or estimating the detailed shape information of an object, or the shape information of a translucent statue, which is very notorious for obtaining its shape using existing methods. We can use polarization for distinguishing the seemingly similar two different cells under this RGB examination, but can be distinguished by using the polarization, such as this the tumor cell and the normal cell. Or we can use the polarization for separating the different layers of human skin that could be used for accurate digital human projects. For enabling all of these applications, what is fundamental is the polarimetric bidirectional reflectance distribution function, or so-called polarimetric BRDF. So let me introduce what that is. Polarimetric BRDF is the concept that we're going to tell you how the light polarization is changed after reflection on a object surface for a given arbitrarily instant direction of light, and then for the arbitrarily the outgoing direction, how its polarization states is changed. The polarimetric BRDF, or PBRDF, describes that as a function. Okay. So this may give you the impression that it is similar to the BRDF, of course, because it has the name of the BRDF in it, right? And actually, the BRDF describes how intensity of light is changed upon reflection, right? for an instant the direction and for an outgoing direction. So here, interesting thing is that polarimetric BRDF is a superset of BRDF because polarimetric BRDF also describes intensity changes, not only its polarimetric change. So in our previous work, what we did is to propose an analytical model of polarimetric BRDF based on Miller-Stokes formalism, Fresnel theory, and microfacet theory. So it is too much detail if I explain these terms one by one. Here, important thing is that this is the very first analytical model that describes the diffuse and specular reflections of light in terms of its polarization. So it is a simple formula in the end by making use of some knowledge in optics and tremendous efforts in computer graphics, especially the microfacet BRDF models. Based on that model, we built an imaging system using a camera and a DRP projector equipped with linear polarizers in front of them to reconstruct the shape and the appearance. Here, appearance means polarimetric BRDF from a fixed viewpoint. Note that conventional methods for acquiring shape and appearance typically requires capturing the object at different spatial positions and directions. However, our method enables this from a fixed viewpoint by making use of the additional information that we can gather from polarization. However, after doing this project, what we realized is that our polarimetric BRDF model is difficult to validate. Why? Why it is difficult to validate this analytical model? It is just because we don't have the ground truth data or ground truth real-world polarimetric BRDF data that we can test our analytical model on to that, right? In order to solve this problem, we conducted a follow-up work to collect these real-world polarimetric BRDFs. To this end, we built an acquisition imaging system that has illumination module on the left side, and then we have a sample made of a homogeneous material with the shape of the spherical the object at the center. On the right, we have the camera module equipped with some polarizing filters and spectral filters. Then we have these polarizing filters in front of the illumination and then camera module, which we rotate one by one and capture multiple images. At the same time, we also rotate this turntable, which will gonna change the orientation of the instant light to the sample. In this way, we can provide the whole different instant illumination angle to the some material, right? We also have spectral filter in front of the camera that are gonna provide the additional information of polarization in terms of different light spectrum. We also capture everything in HDR mode. So here is the example video of our captured material. This is a gold spherical object. On different rows, we show the captured video at different light spectrum, light wavelengths. And then also in the same row, we show different videos for the different polarization filters angle. Of course, by rotating our turntable. In this way, we captured the very first polarimetric BRDF dataset that covers large directional space. Also, it describes the complete polarization change of light it has 25 real-world materials database. Okay, and this is the very first polarimetric BRDF data set that we can use to analyze the polarization changes under the real-world condition. What we can do with this polarimetric BRDF is to improve or analyze or simulate how polarization of light changes under some ideal condition. So here is a typical rendering of some robots in a path tracing renderer. So this is the intensity RGB rendering result, right? But now that we have these polarimetric BRDFs, what we can do further on top of this is to simulate how polarization states of light change during this light transfer, right? On the top left side, this is the degree of polarization. So more black color means that the light is unpolarized, meaning that light is randomly polarized. More reddish color means that the light is polarized to a certain direction, or it could be circularly polarized. On the top right side, this one tells you whether the light is linearly polarized or circularly polarized. On the bottom side, they show the orientations of circular and linear polarization. Not only doing this simulation, what we can further do is to find out the relationship between the various material properties with polarization. Here on the left side, we show the white billiard ball, its captured intensity and its linear polarization direction. Okay, here you can see that the linear polarization's orientation is related to the surface normal, as indicated by this color. However, what we can find out here is that in this chrome material, the linear polarization's direction does not tell you about the surface normals of this object. What we found out here additionally is for this metallic chrome material, actually circular polarization's orientation encodes some information about the surface normal on this metallic material. This new insights gives a hint that it might be possible to extract surface normals of metallic material by analyzing circular polarization. Another observation that we made is the relationship between rough surface roughness and polarization. On the left side, we show two samples. One is spectral one, which has very rough surface profile. On the bottom side, we have the ceramic material, which has the really specular appearance, as indicated by the specular highlight at the center. If you look at AOLP, which is the orientation of the linear polarization, or DOP, degree of polarization, you can easily see that the surface roughness, high surface roughness makes this surface normal dependency of linear polarization angle and degree of polarization weaker. Okay. Another interesting observation we made is that if we capture real gold material and fake gold materials, in the RGB domain, it is difficult to identify which one is the real one. However, if we look at the orientation of circular polarization, interestingly, their orientation of circular polarization are completely flipped with each other, which we're going to tell you what is real and what is fake material. That was the reflectance imaging part. And let me move to the time of flight imaging. Time of flight imaging aims to measure the time it took from the emittance of light from a camera and then its arrival after the travel in the scene. And these time measurements, we're going to tell you about the distance between the camera and the mirror here. In this graph, the x-axis is the time of flight, and y-axis is the detected number of photons. So since the emittance of the light, we measure how long does it take from the arrival of the how long does it take the light back to the camera, right? And this time of flight information can be converted into the depth information of the scene based on this simple formula, depth equal time of flight multiplied by speed of light divided by 2. And this time of flight application can be shown in these nice visual examples of emitting the light into the entire space and measure its reflected time to recover its depth information. And as you saw, the applications of time of flight imaging are quite diverse, and it has time of flight imaging can be categorized into the two major different directions. One is the direct time of flight camera. The other is the indirect time of flight camera. And for the direct one, we have this time of flight imaging module in our mobile phone, autonomous vehicle, and also in the airborne devices. For the indirect time of flight camera, we have it on our gaming devices, AR, VR devices as well. So as you just saw, we have two different technologies in this time of flight imaging. The first one is the direct time of flight imaging, and we use the typically APD or SPAD SPAD sensors for this direct time of flight imaging. For the indirect time of flight imaging, we often use photonic mixer device called as PMD. Okay, we use the different sensing techniques for these different time of flight imaging modalities. Now, let me show you some our recent work regarding this direct time of flight imaging. As I mentioned before, time of flight imaging measures how long does it take from the emittance of light photons to the arrival of them. But in the real world, if we have the real bunny here, even though we emit the light photons at a small period of time, when they reflect back to the camera, we now suddenly have this long different kinds of like the photons with different time of flight, just because there are numerous light passes happening in the interaction of light with this light matter, with this real object. And that generates this long tail histogram of detected light photons with different time of flights. What people have been doing so far is that they collect, even though they collect all of these photons, they do care about the first arriving photons in order to estimate the scene depth information based on the previous formula, which is a valid way because the first arriving photons are likely to be related to the real depth information of the scene. However, what we wondered is that what kinds of information do we have in the first arriving photons? Do we have additional information that we can extract from those photons? And that's what we investigated. And for the first arriving photons, it is related to the direct surface reflection. And its time of flight information, we're going to tell you the depth from that object surface to the camera. And here, if you look at the polarization states of this surface reflected light, we found out that it is related to the surface roughness of that object. However, for the late arriving photons generated by the subsurface scattering inside of the surface, So here you can understand these late arriving photons as a result of light that is that penetrates the surface of the object and then interact with the molecules inside of this object, and then in the end exits from the surface and then captured by our camera. And what we found out is that the polarization state of these late arriving photons depends on the surface normals and scattering properties of this object. Based on this observation, we presented a new BRDF model that incorporates the temporal dimension on top of our previous polarimetric BRDF. So what it does is it tells you how light intensity and polarization changes in time upon reflection. We proposed a Miller matrix function, 4x4 function, that is dependent on the temporal delay, instant, extant directions, and some scene parameters. Here, it is very similar to our previous polarimetric BRDF, but the difference is that we added additional dimension of light transport, which is the time of flight. This will gonna tell you how scene parameters is related to the captured measurements of time of flight camera in consideration of polarization. Given this, our proposed temporal polarimetric BRDF model, in order to acquire those data, we built an imaging system consisting of picosecond laser that emits the light to a scene. And we have some polarization filters and galvanometer that are gonna allow us to scan through this scene. The light is reflected from a scene and then captured by a SPAD sensor, the direct time of flight sensor. We have the beam splitter and polarizing filters as well. This imaging system gives us the raw measurements of polarimetric time of flight imaging. So here, before evaluating our method on real scenes, we evaluated on some synthetic scenes. This is the synthetic, this is synthetic intensity image of a scene. Then our method enables us to extract the accurate depth information, this synthetic scene. Here is the comparison to the conventional time of flight method that only utilizes these first arriving photons reflected from the object surface. Note that in contrast to this conventional time of flight, our method utilizes all photons, including first arriving and late arriving photons, and their polarization states in order to reconstruct this accurate depth information. As you can see here, our method also supports the direct estimation of surface normals and other material parameters such as refractive index, surface roughness, and some scattering properties. I'm gonna skip the details here, but what I want to tell you is that our temporal polarimetric BRDF model provides the link between these scene properties and our measurements. And by using that, we can estimate these properties inversely based on some gradient descent based method. We also, of course, evaluated our method on real objects, and we used the measurements acquired from our experimental prototype. Here is the result from conventional time of flight, its surface normals and depth information. As you can see here, conventional time of flight method couldn't resolve these geometric details in the measurements. Our all-photon polarimetric time of flight imaging were able to capture these fine detailed geometries. Okay, next, let me give you the example of how we can improve the indirect time of flight imaging based on computational imaging method. In order to do that, let me explain the correlation time of flight or indirect time of flight imaging in general. Here we have the indirect time of flight imaging camera. What it does is it basically emits some illumination to a scene similar to the direct time of flight. And there is a scene. If we zoom in here, if you look this into details, our illumination emitted from time of flight camera has interesting intensity modulation pattern in a sinusoidal way. So in other words, our time of flight camera emits intensity modulated illumination to a scene in a sinusoidal manner. Then after hitting this target scene, the intensity modulated light will be reflected back to the camera. Based on the depths between the time of flight camera and the target, there would be phase shift between the emitted light and then the detected light from a camera. And this phase shift can be used to obtain the depth information. So our goal in this indirect time of flight imaging is to obtain this phase shift to recover scene depth. In order to do that, we have a special sensor called as photonic mixer device or PMD. And inside of this PMD sensor, what it does is it has some reference signal that is aligned with the intensity modulation pattern for the illumination. And then this signal is correlated with our reference signal that are going to give you some constant value that could be decoded to estimate the scene depth. However, the problem of existing correlation time of flight imaging is that we have noise added in this photon electron conversion process. So what that is that when we have instant photon on this photonic mixer device, that photon will be converted into the electron, right? And then we process this electron in an electric manner, and we compute this correlation in the electric domain to estimate the true phase shift information. However, in that conversion process from photon to electron, there will be some inevitable noise added. What we proposed in our recent work is that we move this correlation computation procedure in the optical domain so that we don't do this photon to electron conversion for this correlation computation. In this way, what we aimed for is that we calculate this correlation, of course, almost without having some noise information added, okay? This allows us to use conventional intensity sensor instead of the specialized PMD sensor, which will gonna even make our method practical by making use of this truly advanced sensor technologies for the intensity sensors. Then this gives us the true advantage of using the optical modulation, optical correlation, and this allows us to increase the modulation frequency of our illumination. So what that is, on the left and the right, here are the sinusoidally modulated illumination intensities with different modulation frequency. On the left, we have a low modulation frequency. On the right, we have high modulation frequency. Here, given a same depth change of a scene, we have much higher contrast on the right, right? And this means that we can distinguish two different surfaces with slight depth difference if we use this high frequency intensity modulation. And however, previously, in a previous time of flight imaging system, it was too difficult to utilize this high frequency modulation because of the inevitable noise in the photon to electron conversion that I just described. However, in our work, because we moved this correlation computation from the analog domain to the optical domain, now we are much more comfortable with handling the noise. So we can increase this modulation frequency quite a lot to achieve this high depth sensitivity. Here are the examples of using the different modulation frequencies of the illumination. When we use the 100 megahertz modulation frequency, we can potentially estimated the dragon objects would look like this. However, if we increase the modulation frequency by 10 times, resulting in 1 gigahertz modulation frequency, now suddenly we can estimate the rough geometry of this dragon. If we increase it up to 10 gigahertz, we can see the fine details of this dragon, right? And this example gives you the sense of how modulation frequency is important in terms of the depth resolution and precision. We built an imaging system that implements all of this idea that's shown on the left. And on the right, here is the scanning procedure of our imaging system. So our system also is based on the galvanometer as shown in the previous direct time of flight system. And we are here illuminating a scene with the really fast intensity modulated light, okay? At 10 gigahertz actually. Let's say that we built our imaging system that could capture everything in that fast, the intensity modulation frequency, and that high intensity modulation frequency, then still we have some important problem to solve, which is the phase wrapping problem. So on the left, this is the simulated depth of a synthetic scene, spans from 1 meter to 1.7 meter. On the right, this is the corresponding the scene. And if we have an indirect time of flight imaging system that capture this scene with 100 megahertz modulation frequency, then what you're going to achieve, what you're going to obtain is the phase shift from 0 to 2 pi, as shown on the left. Here, you're going to notice a clear boundary on this pillow and on the sofa between the 2 pi to the 0 pi, just because there will be inevitable the phase wrapping, because phase is only defined from 0 to 2 pi, okay? And then in order to obtain the accuracy in geometry from these phase shift measurements, you need to solve a phase unwrapping problem that are going to solve this, that are going to convert this one into the continuous depth estimate, depth information. And in a previous imaging system that uses this 100 megahertz modulation frequency, it was relatively trivial to convert this one into a proper depth map. However, this problem gets extreme when we use high modulation frequencies. For example, when we increase the modulation frequency to 1 gigahertz, as shown on the right, now suddenly this number of phase wraps in this scene jumps to the 5. When we use 7.15 gigahertz modulation frequency, which we used in our experimental prototype, the number of phase wraps suddenly jumps to this 35. And unwrapping these measurements is not trivial anymore. Even more difficult our imaging system utilized two different measurements at 7.15 gigahertz. The other is 14.32 gigahertz. I mean, this additional information of the second frequency definitely helps to decode this problem of the phase wrapping. However, still having these two measurements poses a new problem of accurate phase unwrapping. Okay. In order to handle this problem, we proposed a segmentation-inspired phase unwrapping neural network. So we're going to skip the details, but the general idea of this network is that we interpret this phase unwrapping problem as a different form of image segmentation. So we want to estimate the correct phase label as a kind of semantic label, right? For the given phase maps. So for each of the phase map region, we want to estimate its phase map index as semantic label. Okay, so that's what we did, and we utilized different kinds of the techniques developed in the recent neural network based approaches, such as the Fourier feature encoding and accurate scalar Gaussian noise modeling, and so on and so on. Let me show you the result. And here is the scene that we captured, this nice, the old man bust. And this is our raw measurements, which is the 7.15 gigahertz phase shift from 0 to 2 pi, of course. Here is the additional measurements that I mentioned at the 14.32 the gigahertz. And this is the reconstructed depth information, right? Here you can see that our phase unwrapping method were able to successfully decode this complicated the many phase wrapping problem. And to more visually examine the result, here is the point cloud, the visualization with the different illumination, the lighting direction. As you can see, our optical the gigahertz modulation in the hardware and the software-based segmentation-based the phase unwrapping network helped resolving the severe noise problem and so on and so on, and we obtained this really nice reconstruction of this bust. Okay, let me now describe our the final topic, which is the multi-dimensional imaging. As you saw in this today's topic, I touched the different aspects of light transport, right? It could be the spatial light transport or temporal light transport or polarization light transport. These are the fundamental dimensionalities of light. And space, of course, means that the light could be propagated into the different direction. Time means that light has a finite speed, so we can measure its travel time. Polarization is the wave property of light related to the oscillation pattern of the electric field. And all of these different properties, we can extract the different information about the scene, right? Then a natural question arises here is that what about to utilize all of these different dimensions of light all together? So here in our last year paper, we try to do exactly do this, and we call it as polarimetric spatio-temporal light transport. And we aimed to model and extract how light bounces off on the scene in terms of polarization, direction, and time. Okay, all of these three things together. first of all, there was no theory or no mathematical formulation about this high-dimensional light transport. So we proposed a tensor theory, which models the instant light with different directions, different polarization states, and different time with a single tensor P. And also, similarly, we model the outgoing light as a different tensor I. And they are related here through a light transport tensor T based on tensor formulation. And this tensor formulation is very high dimensional, different from the conventional the vector matrix multiplication. In fact, this instant light has three dimensionalities. Outgoing light has 4 dimensionality, and light transport, most importantly, is modeled as 7D tensor, which is really high dimensional compared to the conventional the light transport. And capturing this 7-dimensional light transport was too difficult with the existing devices. So what we had to do is to capture a partial information of these 7-dimensional light transports with 2 different imaging systems, which are all novel by itself. On the left side, we have the spatio-temporal imager that captures the spatial light transport on top of the polarization light transport. On the right-hand side, we have the coaxial temporal polarimetric imager that enables us to capture the light transport in terms of polarization and time, but not in spatial dimension. With these 2 separate imaging modalities, we demonstrated many applications that could be benefited from analyzing these different dimensionalities jointly. The first one is the shape reconstruction. As you just saw on the left side, we have the dragon that consists of the really translucent material, which complicates the reconstruction of its shape using conventional techniques. For instance, on the middle, this is the reconstruction results of its surface geometry using structured light, which is the one of the D-factor, the 3D scanning method. As you can see, its results are not that good in terms of its surface normals. However, by analyzing both spatial and polarimetric light transports, our method enables accurate surface normal reconstruction as shown on the right. I'm going to skip the details, but this is only possible because we looked at the light polarization and spatial dimensions together. Also, what we tested out is the descattering. This is the clear view of a ruler and a doll right behind a glass that contains some water inside. We have our spatial polarimetric imaging system in front of this scene that consists of a camera and a light source. And we pour milk inside of this glass that are gonna limit this visibility of the scene quite significantly. This is just because some of the light emitted from our illumination module will be directly reflected from this milk particle inside of this glass, instead of penetrating all of this and then reaching to the doll and ruler and then reflected. And the relative the amount of light intensities coming from this rear door and ruler gets much smaller than before. We found out that by analyzing the spatial polarimetric light transports together, we are able to see through this dense scatter quite effectively, as you can see on the right. I'm going to show you another example, which is birefringent analysis. Here we have interesting crystals, and some are transparent here and here. Some are the opaque, as you can see on this here and here. if we capture this interesting crystal scene with our spatial polarimetric imaging system, then we can even examine the surface of this transparent crystal, right? As we all know, examining the surface of the transparent objects is quite difficult. However, by analyzing the polarization states of light jointly with its spatial light transport allows us to examine the surface profile of this transparent crystal and also find out some polarization specific characteristics of real crystals that could be useful for finding out useful minerals in the geology. The last example is the metabolism detection. On the left side, we have two apples, and one is real apple, the other is fake apple. So it is difficult to distinguish them in this RGB captured image, right? However, by analyzing the spatial polarimetric characteristics of the light transport, we are able to distinguish the real apple from the fake apple, because fake apple has unique the polarimetric reflectance property different from the real one. Okay, that was it. Today I covered the 4 different topics of my recent researches. And as you saw, I study how to capture, model, analyze, and exploit light waves for graphics, vision imaging, and vision display applications. And that was it. And I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, thanks for Baek's nice presentation. So any questions? We have a few time for questions. So I have a question. So hi, Baek. There is one problem I have seen before, especially for the subscattering of time-of-flight sensing. No matter how, especially for the indirect time-of-flight. For direct time-of-flight, we can capture the histogram is okay. But especially for some material with subscattering, when we're imaging with the indirect time-of-flight, do we have any faster way to correct the depths introduced by the error of the subscattering?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I think there is no solution, unfortunately, for now. So there have been many attempts for correcting the subsurface interreflection thing in this indirect time-of-flight imaging system, but those directions have been mainly centered around correcting the large-scale interreflection, so-called multipath interference, right? However, the scattering generated inside of the surface, which is called a subsurface scattering, has received less attention in the indirect time-of-flight imaging regime, just probably because it's insufficient information to extract that, right? And however, it would be very interesting to find out some ways of doing that. Probably that should start from mathematically modeling that procedure. That could be related to my temporal polarimetric BRDF model or some other things as well. Yeah, but that could be an interesting future work for sure.
Do you think it's using the polarimetric, we can use in polarimetric time-of-flight to do some correction or coding to solve this problem?
Yeah, I think there might be some ways of doing that. But in order to correctly untangle these complicated polarimetric properties change by both multipath interference and subsurface scattering, I believe that we need to first simulate everything in simulation, in a renderer, in a synthetic renderer, and see some patterns or hints about the relationship between these multipath interference, subsurface scattering, and time-of-flight polarization.
All right, that's great. So Dr. Tuxin have one question. Let me repeat his question. So for the first work, I think currently your method is designed for offline usage to determine the light patterns. Is it possible to adjust the pattern to associate the hardware in real time during the capturing?
Yeah, that is a great question. And that's actually our ongoing work as a future direction. So yeah, that is definitely possible. And we are pushing ourselves towards that goal to enable real scene adaptive the 3D accurate imaging.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you for great questions.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah.
So do we have any other questions? All right, no more questions. So thanks for Dr. Tuxin and the Professor Seung-hwan back again. And also thanks for all the audience and also the Asiagraphics committee. So today we have already extended for 10 minutes. So we can stop over here. And thanks for everybody again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Professor. Yeah. Hi.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks all the audience. Bye bye.